Not a gasp, not a scream, not even the sharp, involuntary inhalation that most beings cannot suppress when they register mortal danger. She looked at me. She looked at the weapon pointed directly at her center mass. And she sighed, the slow, deflating exhale of someone who has just discovered that the cafeteria is out of their preferred nutritional supplement. The sound of mild inconvenience. The sound of Tuesday. Then she reached up and adjusted her hair. The elastic band holding her ponytail had apparently slipped a few centimeters during her work session. This, not the trained professional assassin, not the plasma weapon that had ended the careers of 37 significant political figures, not the imminent termination of her biological existence, was what demanded her immediate attention. She tucked a loose strand behind her ear with the brisk efficiency of someone performing a task for the 10,000th time, made a small, satisfied sound under her breath, and then looked back at me. "Are you done?" she asked. Her voice was the vocal equivalent of a shrug. I stood there for what I estimate was approximately 4 full seconds. All 3 of my eyes blinked in sequence. My neural processor, which had spent 17 cycles cataloging every variety of target response and developing appropriate countermeasures for each, produced no output whatsoever. It had simply stopped, like a machine handed an input it was never designed to receive. "Excuse me." "I manage. The whole menacing stance thing," she said, gesturing vaguely at the weapon, at my general posture, at the implied existential threat of the entire encounter. "Are you done with it? Because I have samples in the centrifuge that need checking in about 4 minutes, and if I miss the window I'll have to restart the entire 14-hour sequence." She paused, and something flickered briefly in her expression. Not fear, not even alarm, but the mildest possible annoyance, the kind reserved for slow data connections and misplaced equipment. The throat clearing was a nice touch, by the way, very theatrical. "I am here to kill you," I said, because apparently we needed to establish the fundamental parameters of the situation with absolute clarity. "Yeah, I figured." She waved one hand dismissively, as though acknowledging a minor scheduling conflict. The gun was a fairly significant hint. "You are not afraid," I said. It came out less like a threat and more like a bewildered observation. She tilted her head and appeared to give this genuine consideration, the way one might contemplate a mildly interesting philosophical proposition encountered unexpectedly on a lunch break. Should you be afraid?" I repeated, and I could hear my own voice climbing into registers I was not previously aware I could access. "I am pointing a military-grade plasma disruptor at you. This specific weapon has ended warlords. It has toppled 3 governments, disrupted 2 economic unions, and once, through a sequence of events that was technically an accident but has since become something of a professional legend, destroyed a small, uninhabited moon." She scrunched up her nose. "That moon thing sounds like a lawsuit." The moon was uninhabited. "Is that a 700 series?" She had taken a step forward, peering at the weapon with an expression I could only describe as professionally evaluative, the look of someone recognizing familiar equipment in an unexpected context. "The Zerathon 700? My colleague's father uses one to heat his coffee." I want you to appreciate the specific texture of the silence that followed that sentence. The weight of it, the way it settled over the laboratory like a fog, muffling everything else, leaving only the hum of the centrifuge and the distant sound of my professional confidence quietly disintegrating. "That model," she continued, apparently satisfied with her identification and entirely untroubled by my silence, "operates by superheating the target's cellular structure, causing catastrophic molecular breakdown at the organelle level. Enormously effective against silicon-based organisms, devastating against crystalline anatomies, excellent results across most standard galactic species." She paused and looked at me with a patient, slightly apologetic expression of a mechanic explaining why the repair will cost more than expected. "Humans, though." She made a back-and-forth gesture with her hand. Hey, I repeated. The word felt very small. "We're approximately 60% water by mass," she explained, moving to her workstation with the unhurried manner of someone delivering a lecture they have given many times before to audiences of varying comprehension. "Water has a specific heat capacity of 4.18 joules per gram per degree Celsius. That is extraordinarily high by planetary standards. It requires a tremendous amount of energy to change water's temperature significantly. Your weapon that would need to output roughly 30% above its maximum rated capacity to cause genuinely lethal damage to human tissue. She glanced at me with something that might, generously, have been sympathy. You'd probably give me a fairly serious sunburn. Maybe some second-degree surface burns in localized areas. But fatal. She shook her head. Not really. I looked down at my weapon. I looked at the technical readout scrolling across its display panel. I looked back at her. She was correct. The specification confirmed it with a cold, indifferent precision of engineering documentation that has no interest in anyone's feelings about what it says. How? I said, very carefully. Does a xenobiologist know the precise thermal tolerances of military hardware? We study life, she said simply, pulling up a stool and sitting down with the ease of someone who had fully committed to the idea that this conversation was happening and that her centrifuge sample could wait a few additional minutes. Life includes knowing what threatens it. She picked up a stylus and turned it between her fingers, not nervously, just thoughtfully, the way someone handles something familiar while they think. Also, humans have an autonomic nervous system that responds to physical trauma independently of conscious thought. Even if you manage to cause serious damage, my body would immediately initiate hemostasis, flood the affected area with immune cells, trigger an adrenal cascade, and begin emergency cellular repair without any deliberate input from me whatsoever. She set the stylus down. We evolved on a planet that has been trying to kill us since before we developed spinal columns. Our bodies are, essentially, biological emergency response systems that happen to also be capable of conducting research. That is not possible, I said weakly. That is Tuesday, she said pleasantly. Want to see something interesting? Before I could respond, and I am genuinely uncertain what I would have said, as my cognitive processes were by this point operating at something significantly below their rated capacity, she stood up and walked past me. Not around me. Past me. Past the weapon that was still technically pointed in her direction. Past 17 cycles of professional reputation and the implicit understanding that people do not simply stroll past drawn plasma disruptors as though they are mildly inconvenient pieces of furniture. She crossed to a small refrigeration unit in the corner of the lab, opened it with a comfortable familiarity of someone who knew exactly where everything was, rummaged around for a moment, and produced a clear container of amber liquid. Orange juice, she said, holding it up at approximately the level of a teacher displaying an educational prop. Fresh squeeze this morning. The pH is around 3.5. She looked at me with the expression of a patient instructor waiting for a student to make the connection. That's acidic enough to corrode certain metal alloys given sufficient exposure time. I drink it for breakfast. She opened the container and took a long, deliberate sip, maintaining eye contact with the focused serenity of someone making a philosophical point through direct demonstration. Refreshing. She set the juice down. She picked up a small brown bag from her workstation. These are almonds. They contain trace quantities of hydrogen cyanide, a compound toxic enough to cause systemic organ failure in most galactic species at relatively modest doses. Not enough to kill a human, because we metabolize it readily and our liver handles a conversion with what I can only describe as casual efficiency. Most species would require medical intervention after consuming a handful. We call them a healthy snack. She offered the bag toward me with genuine hospitality. Would you like one? I would very much not like one. Your loss. She ate 3 of them with apparent satisfaction, chewing thoughtfully. Oh, and this, she picked up a water bottle from beside her terminal, is oxygenated at standard station levels, which runs about 15% above Earth atmospheric norms. When humans are exposed to low oxygen environments for extended periods, we don't deteriorate in any permanent sense. We adapt. Our bodies produce additional red blood cells. Our lung capacity adjusts. Our metabolic processes recalibrate themselves across several weeks. It's apparently fairly uncomfortable during the transition, but we do it. She took a drink of her apparently bioactive water with every sign of enjoyment, whereas most galactic species in sustained low-oxygen conditions simply die. This is insane, I said. This is biology, she said, and there was genuine warmth in it, the warmth of someone who loves their subject. Want to see one more? She slapped her own arm, not gently. The crack of it resonated sharply across the lab's hard surfaces, and a vivid red mark bloomed immediately across her skin. I took an involuntary step backward, which I will not pretend was a dignified response. "Watch," she said. 30 seconds passed. The mark faded, not completely, but measurably, the acute inflammation retreating, the tissue visibly beginning the process of organizing a repair. Our circulatory system sits close to the surface in certain areas. We bruise easily. We bleed easily. But our baseline healing rate is remarkable for a species without any apparent dedicated biological regeneration mechanism. Give us several hours, and we can recover from injuries that would permanently incapacitate most species. She flexed the arm experimentally, apparently satisfied with the demonstration. We just keep going. It's more or less the only thing we know how to do. The lab door hissed open. I spun. Weapon raised. Threat assessment algorithms firing in rapid, overlapping sequence, calculating angles and distances and response options with a practice speed of 17 cycles of professional conditioning. 2 humans walked in. A tall male with close-cropped dark hair and the posture of someone who had been in complicated situations often enough that complicated had long since stopped registering as unusual. A female with vivid red hair and a dense constellation of freckles across her nose and cheeks, carrying a food container that smelled, even from across the room, like a chemical event in progress. The male, his name tag read Marcus, looked at me, looked at the weapon, looked at Iris with a calm, assessing expression of someone taking a quick inventory of a situation. "You good?" "Fine," she said, with the tone of someone confirming that yes, the weather is pleasant today. Explaining human physiology. "Marcus, Quinn, this is Vexa. He came to kill me." Marcus nodded slowly, as though this was an unusual but not entirely unprecedented Tuesday development. "How's that going?" "Not great for him," Iris said. Quinn, the red-haired one, had already set down her food container and was examining my weapon with the squinting, professional attention of someone who recognizes a piece of equipment they have seen before. "Is that a Zerathon 700? She straightened up. "My dad has one of those. Uses it to heat his coffee." The silence that followed was, if anything, worse than the first one. "That's exactly what I said," Iris agreed. "You people," I said, and my voice had achieved a flatness that suggested the complete and total evacuation of ordinary emotional content. "Use military-grade weapons. As kitchen appliances." "It was just sitting in the garage," Quinn said, with a shrug of someone explaining something they genuinely cannot understand why anyone would find surprising. Seemed wasteful not to use it for something. Marcus opened his food container. The smell that emerged was extraordinary, something organic and deeply acidic, layered with a sharp chemical bite that triggered an immediate protest response from my olfactory system. "Anyone want lunch?" I brought sandwiches. Ghost pepper and avocado. "Ghost peppers," I said. The words emerged from somewhere distant and hollow, like a transmission from a collapsing star. Ghost peppers have a Scoville rating that causes hemorrhagic tissue damage in the nasal passages and immediate anaphylactic crisis in most carbon-based species. "Great for the sinuses," Marcus said, entirely untroubled, and took an enormous bite with the enthusiasm of someone eating something he genuinely enjoys. I lowered my plasma disruptor. Not because I made a decision to do so. Not because I had reassessed the tactical situation and determined that a different approach was warranted. My primary manipulator limbs simply reached a collective conclusion that the energy expenditure was no longer justified, and lowered the weapon with a quiet resignation of limbs that have seen enough. I stood in the center of Lab 7 on Kepler 442b and felt, for the first time in 17 cycles of professional operation, genuinely uncertain about what to do next. I had one option remaining. From my equipment harness, I withdrew the neural disruptor. It was the most sophisticated piece of equipment I carried, a device whose manufacturer had, in a moment of genuine corporate hubris, described it in the product documentation as the last word in consciousness termination. It operated by emitting precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses tuned to the synaptic frequency of carbon-based neural tissue. The result was instantaneous unconsciousness, followed by progressive, irreversible neural cascade failure within 30 seconds. No heat. No cellular damage, no mess, just a clean, quiet, electromagnetic silencing of whatever was happening inside a skull. It had a 100% operational success rate across every species I had ever used it against. I had used it 41 times. It had never, not once, produced any result other than the expected one. I pointed it at Iris Bellamy. She looked at it with an expression I would need several attempts to describe accurately. It was not fear. It was not defiance. It was a specific, slightly tired expression of someone who has just been shown a solution to a problem that doesn't actually apply to the problem at hand, and who is trying to decide whether to explain this in a way that preserves everyone's dignity. Human brains, she said gently, are encased in a solid calcium phosphate structure called a skull. Average thickness of about 6.5 millimeters, dense enough to significantly attenuate electromagnetic fields. She paused. Also, our neurons operate using both electrical impulses and chemical neurotransmitter signals simultaneously. The chemical component makes us substantially resistant to purely electromagnetic interference. The signal gets confused rather than terminated. Another pause. I'm not saying this to be unkind. I just think you should know before you. I fired it anyway. The pulse hit her squarely between the eyes. I watched it land. She blinked twice. Then she raised one hand and rubbed the spot with a mildly puzzled expression of someone who has just experienced a minor, unexpected sensation and is trying to categorize it. "Oh," she said. "That was strange. Sort of tingly, like a mild static discharge." She turned to Marcus. "Did you feel that?" Marcus looked up from his sandwich. "Feel what?" Vexa just shot me with a neural disruptor. He appeared to consider this while chewing. "Did anything happen?" "Not really. I might have a slight headache." She touched the spot again, experimentally. "Maybe." Quinn, who had settled into a chair with her own food and had been watching the proceedings with the attentive interest of an audience member at a moderately entertaining performance, laughed. Genuinely, helplessly laughed. Not cruelly, but with the specific delight of someone watching something that is exactly as funny as they expected it to be. You should try the Sonic Devastator next if you have one. Those are always hilarious on humans. We get nauseous for about 15 minutes. We throw up sometimes, Marcus added, with a helpful tone of someone providing complete information. But honestly, we throw up when we drink too much alcohol anyway. It's not particularly dramatic. I stood there with a discharged neural disruptor in my hand and the ruins of a 100% success rate scattered across the laboratory floor, and I did something I had not done since the early cycles of my career, when I was still young enough to be surprised by things. I conducted an honest inventory. Toxin injector. She had described an immune and metabolic system of such elaborate sophistication that the human body essentially treated environmental toxins as a recurring project management challenge rather than an existential threat. Thermal grenade. She had mentioned, in passing, that humans had colonized every climate zone on their planet, including regions where the ambient temperature would kill most species within the time it takes to draw a second breath. Kinetic projectile weapon. I looked at Quinn, who was eating something assembled from ingredients that should not, by any reasonable interpretation of nutritional science, be combined and consumed, and I thought about the dense calcium architecture humans apparently maintain throughout their skeletal structure, and I decided that bullets were probably not the revelation I was hoping for. "You're running out of options," Iris said. She said it quietly, without triumph, without cruelty, with the specific, careful gentleness of someone who understands that what is happening to the person in front of them is humiliating, and who has decided, for reasons that probably say something important about her character, not to make it worse. "Yes," I said. "The word cost something. Sit down," she said. She pulled over a chair and positioned it with the practical efficiency of someone who had spent enough time in laboratories to know that conversations worth having are better conducted sitting. "Let me tell you about where I come from. I sat today, mostly because my leg segments had quietly voted, without consulting me, that they were done supporting my weight for the foreseeable future. The holographic display above a workstation bloomed into images, a planet of staggering, almost confrontational variety. Liquid water covering vast stretches of its surface. Continental masses of extraordinary geological complexity. Atmospheric systems visible even from orbit. Massive spiraling structures of cloud and pressure that spoke, without ambiguity, of weather operating at a scale that other planets simply didn't bother with. Earth. Class 12 Deathworld. I had, until this moment, assumed that classification was someone's idea of colorful exaggeration. Most habitable zone planets, Iris began, with composed authority of someone who had thought about this deeply and often, who had probably explained it before to other people who hadn't fully understood what they were dealing with, are what you would call stable. Predictable climate bands, moderate temperature variation, one or two apex predators that are territorial rather than actively expansionist, manageable. You learn the rules and you navigate around the dangers, and it's survivable with reasonable precautions. She looked at the image of her planet with an expression I found difficult to interpret, something between pride and something older and less simple than pride. Earth is not like that. Earth is what happens when a planet spends 4 billion years running the most intensive competitive evolutionary pressure test in this section of the galaxy, with no safety net, no moderation, and absolutely no interest in making anything easy for anyone. Marcus set down his sandwich. My hometown gets hurricanes every year. Massive rotating atmospheric systems driven by ocean temperature differentials. Wind speed sufficient to destroy reinforced structures. They come in from the ocean and move inland, and they take things apart. He said this with a matter-of-fact delivery of someone describing a seasonal traffic pattern. We rebuild. We wait for the next one. Sometimes there are two in the same season. My region has tornadoes, Quinn said from her chair. They're like the angrier, more focused cousins of hurricanes. A rotating column of air that descends from a storm system and moves across the landscape and picks up everything in its path. Vehicles, structures, anything not anchored deep enough. We have a season for them. Tornado season. It's on the calendar. People track them with dedicated sensor networks. She ate a bite of her food. It's actually kind of exciting if you're in the right place. Watching, from a safe distance. Earthquakes, Iris continued, and the images on the holographic displays shifted. Cracked roads, collapsed structures, landscapes that had rearranged themselves over the course of a few violent seconds. The tectonic plates forming Earth's crust are in constant motion. When they slip against each other, the surface ruptures. Buildings fail. Infrastructure fails. Entire geographic features can change shape with no warning. You could be standing somewhere perfectly ordinary, and the ground simply decides to do something different. She said this with no evident distress. And volcanoes, mountains that erupt, they bury cities in ash and lava flows. The eruption at Tambora in 1815 injected enough particulate matter into the upper atmosphere to alter global weather patterns for 2 years. It contributed to crop failures across multiple continents. It caused famine. And we still build cities near active volcanoes because the soil is very fertile, Quinn said, in the tone of someone completing a sentence they have heard many times and have come to find genuinely reasonable. The soil is extraordinarily fertile, Iris confirmed. I looked at the images. I looked at the humans eating their lunch in the particular, unself-conscious way of people who have never developed the habit of being frightened by things they can't immediately change. And I felt something begin to shift in my understanding, not the terrified, destabilizing shift of the past hour, but something deeper and slower, like a tectonic adjustment of its own. The wildlife, Marcus said, accepting a second portion from Quinn's container without looking at what it contained, is also worth a conversation. Australia, one of our major continental landmasses, is home to 21 of the 25 most venomous snake species in the catalogued galaxy. It also has spiders of significant size, jellyfish capable of killing a human in minutes with a single touch, a small octopus that carries enough neurotoxin to kill 24 adult humans, and a flightless bird with clawed feet capable of causing evisceration in a single strike. 25 million people live in Australia, Iris said. It's actually quite beautiful. Lovely beaches. Africa has lions, which are large apex predators that hunt in cooperative social groups. Elephants, which are several thousand kilograms of intelligent, territorial animal with excellent memory and genuine capacity for sustained aggression. Hippopotamuses, which are semi-aquatic, profoundly territorial, faster than their mass suggests, and responsible for more human fatalities per year than most people expect. And crocodiles. Quinn paused with the weight of someone saving the most significant item for last. Crocodiles have existed, essentially unchanged in fundamental design, for approximately 200 million years. Evolution has made no meaningful improvements to them in that time, because there were no improvements to make. They are, by any reasonable metric, already perfect. South America has the Amazon basin, Iris said. Poison dart frogs with skin toxin sufficient to cause cardiac arrest. Anacondas large enough to consume prey the size of a grown human. Piranhas, caimans, jaguars. Bullet ants, whose sting is described by people who have experienced it as feeling like being shot, which is where they get the name. And approximately 2.5 million catalogued insect species, most of which have developed some mechanism, chemical or physical, to cause harm to things that bother them. She pulled up additional imagery: dense green canopy, rivers wide as inland seas, a landscape of stunning and indiscriminate lethality. And that is only the large, visible, already catalogued threats. We haven't touched the microscopic ones. Please, I said, and I was surprised by how much I meant it. Please do not touch the microscopic ones. She touched the microscopic ones. Diseases that liquefied organ tissue. Parasites that cross the blood-brain barrier and establish colonies in neural matter. Single-celled organisms that entered through nasal passages and consumed brain tissue with the calm efficiency of things that have been doing exactly this for millions of years. Viruses capable of dismantling immune systems from the inside, leaving the body unable to defend itself against infections that would otherwise be trivial. Prions, misfolded proteins, not even technically alive, just shapes that could cause the brain to slowly, irreversibly consume itself over the course of months or years. And through all of this, I said, when she had finally stopped, humans survived. Not all of us, she said, and for the first time, something in her voice changed. The composure remained, but underneath it something older and more honestly felt moved briefly to the surface. Never all of us. The list of everyone we've lost, to the planet, to the diseases, to the disasters, to each other, is very long. We don't minimize that. A pause, but enough survived. Always enough. Every time something came close to ending us, something held on. Something adapted. Something looked at conditions that should have been incompatible with continued existence and found a way through them anyway. I don't understand you, I said. It came out quieter than I intended. Less like a tactical observation, and more like something honest. I don't understand why you're not afraid. Not just right now. I've accepted that I'm apparently not frightening by your standards, and I'm working through the professional implications of that. But in general, as a species, I don't understand how you're not permanently, fundamentally shattered. You live on a planet that has been trying to end you since before you had the neurological architecture to understand what trying to end you means. You've survived mass extinctions. You survived diseases that killed half your civilizations at a time. You survived your own planet's geology and your own planet's weather and your own planet's wildlife and your own planet's microscopic inhabitants, all of which have been evolving ways to kill things for longer than your species has existed. I stopped, looked at all three of them. How are you not broken by it? How are you cheerful? How are you eating lunch? The three humans looked at each other. Something moved between them in that exchange. Not words, not signals exactly, but the particular quality of shared understanding that only develops between people who have carried the same weight for a long time and learned to carry it together. Marcus put down his sandwich. We are, Iris said quietly. Oh, we have been. Oh, it's more complicated than a clean answer. She turned the stylus in her fingers again, the same slow, thoughtful motion as before. Humans develop humor as a primary psychological survival mechanism, not as a luxury, not as a cultural refinement, as something genuinely necessary, because the alternative is despair, and despair doesn't help you survive. When things are terrible, and on Earth, things have been terrible with remarkable consistency across our entire history, we make jokes. We find the absurdity embedded in the horror. We name the fear, and we laugh at it, not because we're denying it, not because we don't feel it, but because laughing is the one response that keeps you moving forward while you're still feeling it. We're optimists by necessity, Marcus said. His voice had lost the cheerful, easy quality it had carried through the sandwiches and the demonstrations, and what was underneath it was something more weathered and more real. Not because the evidence supports optimism. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes things get worse for a very long time before they get better, and sometimes they don't get better in any way you can recognize. But you have to believe they might. You have to keep trying, keep adapting, keep getting up, because stopping is the one thing our evolutionary history never allowed. Everything that stopped is gone. We are what's left of everyone who didn't stop. Quinn had set down her food. She was looking at me with the steady, unguarded attention of a scientist making a careful observation. On Earth, you either develop a psychological architecture to keep going despite everything, or you don't last long enough to pass anything on to the next generation. We are the biological and psychological inheritance of every ancestor who survived when survival wasn't reasonable. Every single one of us. All the way back to the things that crawled out of the ocean 375 million years ago into a world that was, by all objective measures, worse than the one they'd left. She paused. You can't breathe that out of something. It goes too deep. And out here, Iris said, everything else feels manageable. It's not that we don't understand danger. We understand danger better than most species, because we grew up surrounded by it in ways that got specific and personal. It's that our calibration is different. Our baseline is different. Out here in the galaxy, things are quieter, more predictable, less likely to try to dissolve us on a cellular level. Something that was unmistakably affection moved across her face. It's actually very nice, most of the time. Very restful. I am trying to kill you, I said, and I heard how it sounded as I said it, how it had drifted, over the course of the last hour, from professional statement to something closer to a reminder I was offering mostly to myself. This is an active assassination attempt. I know, she said, gently, without condescension. But you're not going to try again, are you? There was a long pause. No, I said, I'm not. Here's what I think should happen, Iris said, and she straightened slightly and folded her hands on the workstation with the composed purposefulness of someone who has navigated enough genuinely difficult situations to know how they need to be brought to a close. You tell me who hired you. We figure out what they actually need, because what they need is almost certainly not my death. Death is permanent. It creates more problems than it solves, and whoever sent you clearly didn't do their biological research first, which suggests a certain amount of operational sloppiness that probably extends to their strategic planning as well. She looked at me steadily. Then we find a solution that costs them less, accomplishes more, and doesn't require anyone to continue spending their afternoon in a failed assassination attempt. You want to negotiate, I said. I want to solve the actual problem, she said. Negotiation is just what solving problems with other people is called. Marcus was already arranging additional chairs. Quinn cleared space on a secondary workstation. The laboratory, which 4 to 5 minutes ago had been the setting for what was supposed to be a routine professional operation, reorganized itself with quiet efficiency into something that looked, improbably, like the setting for a productive meeting. Someone produced a nutrient canister calibrated for non-human metabolisms and set it in front of me without comment. I accepted it with the dignity of someone who has already been humiliated past the point where small things matter. We talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Iris was precise and lateral in her thinking in equal measure. She understood the structure of the problem clearly enough to find angles that weren't obvious, and she cared enough about getting to an actual resolution that she was willing to do the unglamorous work of reasoning through every implication. Marcus asked the practical questions, the ones about implementation and cost, and who would need to agree to what. Quinn said relatively little, but listened with the focused attention of someone who catches the things other people miss, and twice redirected the conversation toward considerations that turned out to be the most important ones. By the end of it, there were 3 concrete proposals on Iris's research terminal, a framework for how the information she had witnessed could be contained in a way that served everyone's interests, and a preliminary agreement that would, if my employers accepted it, make the whole elaborate, expensive machinery of the contract entirely unnecessary. I ate the mediocre nutrient supplement. I drank a glass of the station's filtered water, which Quinn had checked was not oxygenated at a level dangerous to my respiratory system. I sat in a chair in Lab 7 and participated in the most unexpected professional experience of 17 cycles, and somewhere in the middle of the second hour, I noticed that I had stopped feeling the specific quality of disorientation that had been with me since Iris Bellamy turned around and sighed, and had replaced it with something that, if I'm being honest about it, might have been a very unfamiliar variety of calm. I filed a report from the Outpost Communication Terminal at 1,700 hours, station time. The humans helped me get the wording right. They found the situation entertaining enough that they wanted to make sure the documentation was accurate, and given the events of the afternoon, I was not in a position to argue about who was best qualified to assess that. The message was not long. Contract terminated. Target elimination not viable. Fundamental biological incompatibility with available arsenal. Detailed technical assessment attached. Alternative resolution framework negotiated with subject. Documentation enclosed. Recommend immediate cessation of all hostile operations against this individual. Strong advisory against any future engagements involving human subjects until comprehensive species assessment has been completed. Further attempts will result in professional embarrassment, operational failure, and education in xenobiology you did not request and will not enjoy. My handler's response arrived in under 4 minutes. A single word, explain. So I explained. All of it. The plasma disruptor and the specific heat capacity of water, the neural disruptor, and the shielding effect of 6.5 millimeters of calcium phosphate bone, the orange juice and the almonds and the anti-gravity ease with which a xenobiologist had consumed things that would require my immediate medical evacuation, the stories about Earth, the hurricanes, the volcanoes, the 200 million years of crocodiles that had never needed to improve, the complete, philosophical, apparently cellular absence of fear, the negotiation, the outcome. There was a pause long enough that I considered sending a follow-up message to confirm the transmission had been received. Then, this is consistent with multiple field reports received from other operatives over the past 8 months. Recommendation accepted. Contract cancelled. Alternative resolution framework under review. Return to base for debrief. And then, after a second pause that felt different from the first one, shorter, more deliberate. Are you compromised? I looked at the message for a moment. I thought about what the question was actually asking, and what the honest answer was, and what the difference was between those two things. "No," I sent back. "I am educated. There is a difference. I will explain that part in person." I was almost at the outpost exit bay when I heard footsteps behind me, the easy, unhurried footsteps of someone moving at a pace they have chosen rather than one anyone has set for them. "Vexa." I stopped. Iris was standing in the corridor with her hands in her coat pockets and the expression of someone who has one more thing to say and has decided it is worth saying. She held out a data chip, standard format, compact, the kind that could hold a library if the files were compressed properly. "Educational materials," she said. "Human biological data, evolutionary history, cultural documentation going back several thousand years, and a comprehensive index of everything that has failed to kill us, organized chronologically and by category." Something shifted in her expression, the composed, professional surface softening slightly into something more personal. "It's a long list. I've been adding to it since I was 12. I took the chip. "Share it," she said, "with your employers, with your colleagues, with anyone who might be considering aggressive action against Earth or human colonies, or individual humans who are trying to do their work in peace." She paused. "We're not the enemy. We've never been the enemy. We're just from somewhere very difficult, and it made us into something very hard to stop. That's not the same as dangerous." She tilted her head. Usually, I repeated. "Usually," she confirmed. And she smiled, that same smile I had seen in the identification photograph, the one that suggested she was sharing a joke with someone who hadn't quite arrived yet. "If you ever want to visit Earth," she said, "let me know. I'll take you around properly. Fair warning, you'll need approximately 17 vaccinations. You should plan on not breathing the outdoor air in certain regions without appropriate filtration, and under absolutely no circumstances should you touch anything in Australia." She said this last part with a warm, specific emphasis of someone speaking from experience. But it's beautiful, in the way that genuinely difficult things are beautiful, when you've learned to see what they actually are. I stood in the corridor of the research outpost for a moment after she had gone back to her laboratory. Stood there with a data chip in my hand and the particular quality of quietness that comes after something has changed, when the change is real enough that you can feel it, but new enough that you don't have the words for it yet. Then I walked to the transport bay and began the long journey back. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Mercenary Network circulated an advisory that spread with the velocity of something simultaneously urgent and deeply clarifying. It originated from my handler's office, compiled from field reports submitted by operatives across 14 different organizations in 17 different systems, all of whom had arrived, through their own varied and professionally humbling routes, at the same conclusion. The document was 5 pages long. It was classified at the highest operational tier. Within 6 days, every mercenary guild, every military contracting firm, every criminal syndicate with any pretension to professional standards had a copy of it. The summary was a single paragraph. Do not engage the humans. Not because they are aggressive. They are, if anything, remarkably patient with species that don't understand what they are dealing with. Not because they possess superior technology or overwhelming military resources or political leverage that makes them dangerous to provoke, but because they are from Earth. Because Earth does not produce easy targets. Because Earth produces, through a process of 4 billion years of pressure and catastrophe and mass extinction and stubborn, cellular refusal to accept that any given condition is a final one, the most resilient organisms in the catalog galaxy, and then gives those organisms a psychological architecture to remain functional while experiencing that resilience, which turns out to be far more formidable than the resilience alone. You cannot break something that has already learned to be broken and kept going anyway. You cannot frighten something that has looked at extinction 5 separate times and simply adapted. You cannot defeat something that carries, encoded into every cell of its improbable and infuriating body, a 4 billion-year-old instruction that has never once been successfully overridden. Keep going. I never took another contract against a human. I know no one in my professional circle who did, after the advisory circulated. The data chip Iris gave me, I have shared with every colleague who has asked, and several who didn't know to ask. I have read its contents more times than I can accurately count, in the late cycles between assignments when the transport is quiet and there is nothing to do but think. There is a small handwritten note at the end of the documentation, appended after the last page of the index, in the informal notation humans use when they want something to feel personal rather than official. I do not know when she added it. I did not notice it until the 3rd or 4th time I read through to the end. It reads, "Welcome to the galaxy. We're glad you finally noticed us. Don't worry, we noticed you first. We were, I think, always going to be afraid of that. We just didn't know it yet. Let me be clear about something before I begin. I have been in this business for 17 cycles. 17. I have taken contracts on ice worlds where the wind could strip your exoskeleton down to the null clusters. I have navigated methane swamps on Drelful where misplaced step meant dissolving slowly into primordial soup, wondering in your final, bubbling moments whether you had remembered to file your tax declarations. I once spent 6 days on Vulture 7, hunted by pack predators with 6 eyes, no mercy, and an unsettling appreciation for anything that had a pulse and a heartbeat. I survived all of it. I survived all of it because I am very, very good at my job. Nothing, not a single contract in 347 completed assignments, prepared me for the humans. You have heard the rumors. Everyone in the galaxy has. Whispered between mercenaries in dim spaceport bars, passed around in classified military briefings, mentioned in hushed and vaguely horrified tones by first-contact xenobiologists who have never quite recovered from the experience. The species from Earth, that peculiar, stubbornly persistent civilization spinning away in the unfashionable spiral arm of the Milky Way, on a planet that, by every measurable standard of galactic biology, should not support complex life, a planet where the water falls from the sky as frozen projectiles, where the ground splits apart without warning and disgorges rivers of liquid rock, where the local wildlife includes creatures whose venom concentrations could incapacitate a Craxian battlecruiser, and where the microorganisms, the microscopic, invisible, impossibly tenacious microorganisms, have evolved over billions of years into something approaching a dedicated arms race against everything else that dares to exist. And somehow, the humans just live there. They thrive there. They look at their nightmare world and call it home, with genuine warmth in their voices, as though the planet's constant attempt to murder them are nothing more than the charming eccentricities of beloved old relative. The galactic community looked at Earth and laughed. We called it a cosmic joke, a fluke, an evolutionary dead end that would correct itself in another few million years. We were catastrophically, humiliatingly wrong. The contract arrived on a Tuesday morning, which should have been my first warning. Nothing of value has ever originated on a Tuesday. I was sipping my morning nutrient solution, reviewing my schedule with the comfortable boredom of someone whose professional life had long since settled into reliable routine, when the file pinged into my neural implant with a standard encrypted header. I pulled it up with the casual indifference of someone who had done this hundreds of times before, expecting the usual: a corporate rival, a political inconvenience, a journalist who had gotten too close to something they should have left alone. Target: Iris Bellamy. Human. Female. 28 standard years of age. Occupation: xenobiologist, currently stationed at the Frontier Research Outpost on Kepler 442b. Threat assessment: minimal. Reason for elimination: witnessed proprietary corporate communications during a routine data transfer malfunction. Classification: liability removal. The attached holo image showed a woman who could most generously be described as unremarkable. Brown hair pulled back into what humans call a ponytail, a functional arrangement, efficient, no nonsense. Dark eyes behind a pair of safety goggles, slightly pushed up onto her forehead as though she had been interrupted mid-experiment. A faint smile that suggested she had found something quietly amusing about having her identification photograph taken, as though the whole bureaucratic ritual of it was a private joke she was sharing with no one in particular. Average height for a human female, which, by galactic standards, made her almost absurdly tall. The file noted she had been off-world for 6 months, embedded on Kepler 442b studying silicon-based xenobiological specimens. No combat training on record. No military background. No cybernetic augmentation. No significant threat indicators of any kind. Just a scientist, the file concluded, who had been standing in precisely the wrong room at precisely the wrong time. I accepted the contract without hesitation. In and out before the end of the morning shift. Clean, efficient, and probably the least interesting assignment I would complete all season. I want you to understand the full weight of that miscalculation as we proceed. The research outpost on Kepler 442b was a kind of facility that makes experienced infiltrators feel vaguely insulted. Security systems designed for biological containment rather than intrusion prevention. Key codes on the exterior doors that hadn't been changed in 2 months. Internal monitoring focused almost entirely inward, watching the labs for contamination events, specimen escapes, pressure failures, with almost no attention paid to what might be coming in from the outside. Science outposts are always like this. The researchers are so preoccupied with what they are studying that they forget entirely that they themselves might be worth studying or targeting. I found Lab 7 in less than 4 minutes. The corridor smelled of chemical compounds I couldn't immediately identify. Sharp, synthetic, overlaid with something organic and faintly unsettling, like the residue of a creature that had been taken apart and examined with great thoroughness. The door was unlocked. The lights were on. Through the narrow observation window, I could see her, Iris Bellamy, alone at a multispectrum analysis terminal, her back fully turned to the door, entirely absorbed in whatever data was scrolling across her screens. Perfect. Textbook. I eased the door open. Drew my plasma disruptor, the Zerathine 700 series, military grade, the weapon that had once dropped an antheric warlord in the middle of his own throne room while surrounded by 40 armed guards. The charged coil hummed to life, cycling up to full capacity with a sound like distant thunder gathering on a clear day. I was perhaps 4 meters away from her. And then I did something I always do, a professional habit, a small concession to the dignity of the moment. I cleared my throat. She turned around. Here's what I expected. Fear. The galactic biological baseline for fear is remarkably consistent across carbon-based species. Pupils dilate, respiratory rate spikes, the body floods with whatever their equivalent of adrenaline happens to be, and the immediate behavioral response falls into one of 3 predictable categories: freeze, flee, or surrender. I have witnessed all 3 thousands of times. I have, on occasion, seen a 4th response technically classified as aggression, but which in practice almost never amounts to anything meaningful when the aggressor is unarmed and staring down a fully charged plasma disruptor. What I got instead was a sigh.